Wonderful, thank you. So good afternoon to everyone joining us locally and in person. And hello to all our online viewers, wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Turnbull. I'm the manager for the Center for Bioengineering and Biotechnology, or CBB as we fondly call it. Welcome to the second day of CBB's third annual conference. It's so nice to accommodate an in-person audience. Thank you for your engagement yesterday and today, and to all of the comments online as well. This year, we bring you Waterloo for Health, Technology, and Society. Yesterday, we discussed the use of technology for accessible care, and today we will carry forward the accessibility considerations while focusing on safety of that said technology. In particular, in the use of health data. Part of CBB's mandate is to translate the knowledge generated at Waterloo alongside our partners to a community audience, and that is the goal and purpose of this event. It is important to recognize that most of our work at Waterloo takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus, where we present from today, is situated on the Haldimand Track, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. Accessible care demands availability, affordability, and approachability, among other things. It is important to recognize that there have been systematic barriers that prevent these essential pillars of access for Indigenous and other underserved peoples. Yesterday, our speakers asked the audience to consider the issues of distance and context. They shared how they are working towards solutions. Today, we will see the power data has to identify some less obvious or tangible inequities. A few housekeeping items. Washrooms are to your right of the exit and down a short set of steps or via the ramps. Questions at the end of each session may be invited by raising your hand in person or using YouTube video comments. Please, if you're comfortable, identify yourself to the rest of the group when asking your question, and make sure if you're online to let the facilitator of the online questions know that you're comfortable enough that they can say your name. Now, I invite Waterloo's Associate Vice President of Health Initiatives and Professor in Systems Design Engineering, Catherine Burns, to officially open our event.
Great, thank you, Carly, and thank you, CBB, for hosting this important event. And I want to thank everybody who's come to this event. I've been really impressed. It's been kind of a conversation, right? We're all kind of learning together. I found yesterday's agenda very exciting, okay? And, the things I kind of took away from it, and I've got a few notes here, we know that there are challenges facing our healthcare system, in particular in Canada. It's exacerbated in our remote and underserved communities that we have here in Canada. And I think here at Waterloo, we have an understanding that technology could be playing a better role. But there are some challenges and there are some barriers and there's some distance to go through before we get there. But I think that role is very important, because I think it's very hard for our healthcare system to innovate without that. Okay, and just a few numbers here. It takes, on average, 10 to 14 years to educate a new doctor, okay? 10 years to build a hospital. Our region's planning for one right now, but that's probably 10 years away. At the same time, 2030 comes up in the news a lot. And what's important about 2030? Well, that's only 8 years away, but that's when the youngest people in our baby boom cohort reach age 65, okay? By 2030, 22% of our population will be over the age of 65. They're estimating 1 million people in Canada will have dementia. They're estimating that the cost of healthcare in Canada will be $1 billion more than it is now. To our GDP, 8.3% will be going to supporting our healthcare system. Okay, these are all kind of calls to action that say we have to start thinking about doing things differently. And I've always been kind of a firm believer that technology has that capability to work in concert, to work hand in hand, to help us to do things differently. And so I did a bit of reflection on what was technology like 10 years ago. And this was kind of fun, actually. I kind of enjoyed this. 10 years ago, most of us were still on 3G networks. Okay? It took us, on average, 5 hours to download a movie. 4G was just coming out. It was just at the cusp of that. A new vehicle had just come out in 2008, the Tesla Roadster. Look where that has gone. Okay? And how important that's become in our society and our conversation about sustainable transportation. I looked at hot Christmas gifts, because this is always a fun list, right, in 2010. Pocket camcorders. Really? Remember? The TomTom and Garmin Nuvis for navigating in your car. Okay? The iPhone 4. Why? Because it had just been released with a front-facing camera. Can you imagine getting through the pandemic without your front-facing camera on all your devices everywhere that you were running on your 4G networks and maybe starting to buy your 5G devices? So we had a lot of things that we learned yesterday. David Marsh talked to us, and he showed us that in the pandemic we did pivot. We made a dramatic pivot in a very short period of time as we pivoted to virtual care to continue providing support. And for the large part, it was very, very successful. At least the same quality of care, in some cases, greater quality of care, more accessibility to people who always found it hard to participate and receive healthcare services through direct participation. But it's also important that we look at this as assisting our healthcare system, right? Okay, assisting our healthcare workers and not taking jobs. And people bring this up to me, and I have to say, the way I see it right now, there's so much work to be done. That's not going to be a problem, okay? But that's our goal, right, to be assistive. And you also heard a lot about co-design. We heard Kerstin and Dautenhahn. I just saw her. Yes, we heard about the importance of co-design, and that this is really key to make sure that our technologies are successful, that they have impact, that they get adopted. Okay? These are some of the core philosophies that are key, I think, to our research here at Waterloo, to our Health Initiatives program, and the areas in which we are hoping to expand and to grow. Okay? In the past year, we launched the Graham Seed Fund, which is a very specific fund to help our researchers collaborate directly with healthcare providers. Many of them in our communities, have them define some of those problems and work together, really in close concert. We're working closely with KW4 Ontario Health Team, okay, who talked at the end of the day yesterday. And we're letting them bring their problems to us, and we're saying, how can we help? Okay, and as we answer those questions about how we can help, we help them, but we also learn of exciting new ways to do our research, okay, ways that we can advance in the future. We're launching this year a program in health data, which ties into with today's theme, so I'm very excited about what we're talking about today. And again, that idea, how do we connect together the various data sources? How do we get beyond the challenges of data interoperability, not just standards, but actually truly working together to solve the problems that we face? Okay? And I know there's people here today who've got a lot of voice and good input on that, and a lot of great ideas coming forward. And we're working together with our community leaders in Waterloo Region. We're telling them, what do you want to do? What can we do here? And Waterloo Region's a very, very special place. People say it's a Goldilocks community. It's just the right size. People know each other. People can make a difference. And we have that commitment. It's hard to even explain the amount of commitment that we get from our community here at Waterloo. And that's very, very special. I think as we pull these together, we're developing a really compelling zone here to have some of the most high impact health, innovation, research, development, and impact in the world. And that's really where I see things. So we had a really exciting agenda yesterday, which I greatly enjoyed. I have no doubt we're going to have an exciting day today. And again, I want to thank CBB so much for hosting this timely and important conversation. Okay? And encourage everybody to enjoy the conversation today, because I know I will. Thank you.
All right, today we are going to begin with a hybrid presentation of a panel discussion. I invite our speakers to take the stage and screen. They are here to discuss health data, opportunities, and challenges for greater collaboration in healthcare. Moderating the panel today is Dr. Alan Forster, Executive Vice President and Chief Innovation and Quality Officer at the Ottawa Hospital on your screen. And I invite Dr. Forster to introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you, Catherine Burns, for your great opening comments and for hosting us today. I really found those comments inspiring, and I concur that Waterloo is a very special place, made extra special by the University of Waterloo and the programs that we lead. So thank you for having us. It's an honor. So it gives me, it's my privilege to introduce our speakers and to have the opportunity to question them and push them on answers that I think will be very informative for the audience. We have three great speakers here. Maura Grossman is a research professor in the School of Computer Science at the University of Waterloo. She's also an adjunct professor at Osgoode Law School at York University, and an affiliate faculty member at the Vector Institute. She's also a principal at Maura Grossman Law, an e-discovery law and consulting firm in Buffalo, New York. We also have Michael Duong. Michael is the head of innovation at Hoffman LaRoche, Canada. So welcome, Michael. And finally, last but not least, we have Daniel Blumenthal, a VP strategy at MD Clone. So it's a real pleasure to bring you all here. And as the topic is outlined, this is really around opportunities and challenges for greater collaboration in healthcare. And really that's about collaboration towards improved system performance, collaboration for which ultimately will be created through learning health systems. And learning health systems have been promoted and demonstrated to be a very impactful way of driving towards better improving our systems. So today we will talk about learning health systems. But at the core of learning health systems is access to data. And as we all know, access to data has been a challenge. And so one of the approaches for addressing the gaps in access to data is taking advantage of something called synthetic data. So we are going to spend a fair bit of our conversation talking about synthetic data to help provide the audience with an understanding of what it is, what opportunities can be created by it, but also what are some of the challenges and sort of issues we're going to need to solve if we're going to really take advantage of. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to our panelists, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to state a few, to make some opening comments. After which we'll go into more of a question and answer section. So Maura, ladies first. I'm sorry I'm not with you on the stage, but please go ahead.
Sure. So I'm going to set the stage for us, and I'm going to talk about three things. One, what are we talking about when we're talking about synthetic health data? Two, what can we use it for? And three, what are some of the issues and challenges? So let me start with what it is. So we all know that everybody's talking about the value of data. It's the new oil. It fuels all of the amazing AI technologies and applications we're seeing today. But it's extremely challenging to obtain for researchers who are bound to certain ethical and data security and data privacy constraints. And it's very challenging for commercial enterprises who often collect or purchase or sell that data, often with very negative repercussions to their reputation, think Facebook, or to problems with regulators, think Google in the EU. But of all the data that's out there, the most sensitive and hardest to come by is the health data, and it's probably one of the most important in terms of what it can do and what we can use it for. So what if Alan and I and MD Clone and Roche were to partner together, and Alan gives me, has real data, but I don't want to use his real data. So say I'm able to get some help from MD Clone and to manufacture a data set based on Alan's data that was very similar to the real data, but it's not traceable to any particular person that was in the original data set. And then I could use that for research and development with one of my partners. So that's what synthetic data is. It's fake data, but it preserves these overall statistical properties that were in the real data set. So it looks, feels, smells like real data, but there's no one-to-one correspondence between any data point in the synthetic data and the original set. So that synthetic data, to the degree it is faithful to the real data, would allow you to do a lot of the same things that you could do with the real data, minus the privacy and security problems, or a lot of them. So you might ask, well, how similar or how different does the synthetic data have to be from the real data to be usable? Well, it really is going to depend. The more similarity between the two sets, the more accurate will predictions be from one set, from the synthetic data to the real data, but also the greater the risk of re-identification. So there's an inherent sort of inherent trade-off between accuracy and privacy, and when one goes up, the other goes down. But I think, and I think all of us would agree, there is a good possibility to find a sweet spot where you can do both. So let's talk about what are some of the potential opportunities and use cases for this kind of synthetic data. So use cases fall on a spectrum from local to global, and from purely academic to public health to purely commercial. And let's sort of look along that spectrum. So a very local public health-oriented use might be a neighborhood hospital that wants to study the quality of its health care and see what is the quality of the care we're providing to our community, because they want to improve it. A slightly more federal approach might be the same thing, but for an entire healthcare system, say for Ontario or for Canada. A more global public healthcare approach might look at nutritional or maternity practices all over the world to observe trends and make recommendations. A local academic use might be an individual researcher at Waterloo or a small research team at a medical school that's seeking to study what's the best treatment for this particular disease. A global academic network might be a whole series of universities, teams all around the world, who are looking to track a global pandemic, say, maybe to prepare a systematic review proposing evidence-based practices. A commercial use could be a startup developing a mental health app to treat patients who are unable to access a psychologist or psychiatrist, or big pharma that wants to develop new medications and test them out and see how they might work and where they're contraindicated. So all of these different use cases can inform practice and lead to the development of new and innovative healthcare products and services. But they also raise a lot of issues and may elicit very different public reactions. So patients may be very willing to permit the use of their data where they perceive it's for their own good or the public good or the local community's good. And they may have very negative reactions when the same data is used for a more commercial purpose. So a lot hinges, I think, both on transparency and people's expectations about how their data is going to be used. So what are some of the potential challenges? First, there's virtually no data governance framework for the use and transfer of this kind of data, certainly in North America. The healthcare regulations like PIPEDA in Canada and HIPAA in the US, they simply do not contemplate this kind of data at all. And right now, consent is typically not required from the original patient when you're going to use their data for quality control or quality assurance, in other words, to improve medical care for them or, say, at your hospital. but it's far less clear what happens now when that data has been used to create synthetic data that is being used for research, where maybe it can be re-engineered, probably it can't. Do we still need the consent of the original person? It's also unclear whether institutional review board review is needed for this research. Some of our colleagues here at Waterloo think so. I don't think it's human subject research anymore when it's completely synthetic, so perhaps you don't. But then how, in this kind of Wild West scenario, do we make sure that the data isn't used in a way that's going to harm data subjects? Even if they're not personally identifiable, what if we're using data from an indigenous population or LGBTQ+, and bias kind of comes into the play? Or who should get access to this data? Who should profit from it? Does some of this profit need to go back to the communities where the data came from? So it's undoubtedly a very, very promising technical development, but I think it's in its infancy with many, many unanswered questions about consent, permissible use, how we're going to protect it. And I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my panelists, my co-panelists.
Thank you.
That was a very great overview, Maura. You know, I think you highlighted some very important issues that we're going to come back to touch on later in the talk and in some of the questions. I'm sure you opened up some ideas for the audience. Over to you, Mike. I'd like to hear your thoughts as the leader for innovation for one of Canada's, most successful pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And thanks, Maura, for laying that background. I think it's important for us as we go into this conversation to understand what it is that we're talking about today. Before I dive into sort of my perspective from representing the industry and the biotechnology and pharmaceuticals industry, I just wanted to say I love the exercise of what if. Like, what if we could do all these things and all this amazing stuff could happen, and my growingly long history with Waterloo right now has really helped me find out that, like, the answers to these what if questions, a lot of them exist in here. Like this campus, this building, these researchers, these students that you guys are training. And I had one of these what if questions probably, Helen, I don't know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. We sat, I don't know if it was this building or another building, but we sat down, had a coffee, and I posed some what if questions. And Helen Chen, she's sitting there, she's kind of said, yeah, we can answer that question for you. Just partner with Waterloo. And we've been partnering ever since. And it's been amazing, some of the barriers and challenges that we've been able to address just by having the right partnerships. And that brings me to speak about sort of the biggest barrier that we've been trying to address together for the last number of years, and that is access to data. And before I talk more about that challenge, I wanted to take a step back and say, what are the data that we're trying to access? What are they for? What are we using them for as an industry? And why is it so important for us? So, data is a big word. I mean, it's a 4-letter word. It's a small word, but it's a big word in the sense that there is so much data out there, so many different types of data. And you can basically say data is the answer, or data are the answer to any question that we have. And so when we as a pharmaceutical company, when we're looking at developing the next big product, the next big drug to cure the next disease or to treat the next illnesses, we have access to probably the best data you can have access to. It's clinical trial data. But when you look at what clinical trial data describe, it is the data that informs us about the product, the drug, and the disease. So using the data and using the evidence that we can generate from these data, we have the best understanding that anybody will ever have about this product and the disease that it treats. But that doesn't help us treat people. That helps us treat a disease. That helps us create a product that treats the disease. And I've had the privilege over the last 10 years or so to build out a new strategy at Roche called personalized healthcare. And personalized healthcare for Roche means we're moving away from treating diseases and moving towards treating people. So When we design a clinical trial and we strip away all these things that we call confounders and biases within the patient populations, what we're basically doing is we're trying to treat diseases. We forget about all the different individual characteristics of patients. We've actually stripped them out. We're using inclusion and exclusion criteria. And now we're generating a massive amount of data that lets us fully understand the disease. And it's great, you have to. You have to understand the product, you have to understand its safety, you have to understand its efficacy. But when you go to use the product in the real world and you're trying to understand how this product performs in real people, in the real environment, you need to bring all of that back in. You need to bring all the confounders back in, you need to bring all the biases back in, and you need to collect data to understand how your product works in people. When they're living in Waterloo, when they're going to work at a hospital, at a factory, you need to understand how your product is working. And that's the data that we're trying to get right now, so that we can have a better understanding of how our products perform and how we can develop better products that work better in the real world, right? And so we call it real world data. At the end of the day, it's just data. It's data being collected through patients being treated by our products in the hospital, in the real world. If we can have access to those data, if researchers can have access to those data, if new startup companies, talents, researchers, students, if people can have access to these data, and if these data are high quality, integrated across a number of various different data sets, then and only then are we going to answer the questions that matter to healthcare sustainability, to public health concerns, to better research and development, to more personalized care. And then ultimately we can see the day where we're creating products that actually treat people versus products that just treat diseases. And that's why we at Roche were interested in this real world data. We're interested in ensuring that we can somehow access these data, as well as other researchers and as well as academics and private sector researchers looking at using these data to create better outcomes for patients. And that's probably the biggest barrier we've faced with respect to these data, are the ability to access it. And so when we look at for different solutions, this may or may not be the solution to help us access these types of data, but it's a very interesting conversation because it's a new technology. As Maura pointed out, the policies are still being shaped around the ability to access it. So now is an incredibly exciting time for us to talk about this specific topic and how it's going to enable more access to data. So I'll pass it back to you, Alan.
Thanks, Michael. And I have to say that's one of the best descriptions of why we need real world evidence that I've ever heard. So thank you for sharing that and delivering it. And again, I've got some points to come back to for questions. I'm sure people in the audience have their own. So maybe over to Daniel. Daniel worked for a company that generates synthetic data. And Maura put out the what if MD clone could potentially generate synthetic data for an agreement between Waterloo and perhaps through Waterloo to other researchers, but to companies. And my understanding, Daniel, is you're doing that already with other researchers around the world. So, but what we'd like to hear from you is your story about MD clone and what's happening around the world with your product.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks as well to Michael and Maura for that background you shared. I'm sorry I can't be there in person today, but definitely excited for this discussion and all the work we're doing together, Alan in Canada with TOH and hopefully soon with many others. So yeah, I'm going to share a bit on the MD clone journey, especially because I think our story and our growth really lines up well with the topic of our panel today. We are a technology company launched about 7 years ago, and back then, and I think it's still true today, and both Maura and Michael just spoke about it. I think we can all agree there are really many smart, talented people out there. Institutions like Waterloo, at the Otto Hospital, at Roche, far beyond though as well. There are really many smart people out there who can leverage health data to discover new therapies and optimize treatments and impact patient health in really a variety of ways. If only we could get those people to have access to the massive amount of healthcare data that we've collected over the years. But the reality is, if you go to a health system today and say, I have a great idea for how to improve care, I just need to apply my solution to your data, the health system would very likely say, and very rightfully say, no, can't do it because gotta protect patient privacy and I can't expose that data to you. So we came up with an idea, again, about 7 years ago, that you could create synthetic data. And as Maura explained, you're essentially creating fake data. It's data that's based on original and real people, still has the meaningful insights, still can be used for really a lot of different analyses and development of new solutions and ideas of products and the like, but it doesn't contain real people. And it was back then, and it still is today, I think, pretty impressive technology. The only problem was that when you went to a hospital and then said, okay, I've solved your privacy challenge, now all I need you to do is extract a data set of a certain population of patients. Maybe I want to discover something about a patient's population of diabetes that are on certain medications. Maybe they have certain comorbidities. There are certain lab results I'm interested in studying. I want you to extract that data for me. The hospital would say, hold on, get in line. And another 6 months would pass, and maybe I'd get the data. And we know when every day matters, of course, to patients, and when the number of opportunities to really impact and improve the care that we provide, cycles of 6 months isn't all that useful. And so we ended up building an end-to-end platform in MD Clone that not only protects the privacy of patient data and does generate this synthetic data that we've been speaking about, but it also makes it possible to search and extract for specific data of interest. And we began to grow with this new product, where we started in hospitals across Israel, and then into the US, and then into Canada. And really, as the solution started to be used, we learned more and more that the way different users would leverage this data, leverage the platform, it could be analysts, could be clinicians, could be administrators, could be entrepreneurs, the way they would interact with the system was actually quite different from each other. And that was really important to our product development, but I think it's really important to the discussion of our panel today. Each user is different. Each use case is different. For some users, for example, it might be really important to know the exact medication used for a certain treatment. For another user, the exact medication may not be so important. They need to know the type of medication used. Was an insulin used of some kind? I don't need to know the exact insulin. Or was a beta blocker used? I don't need to know the exact beta blocker that was administered. And that's on the data utility side. If we shift over and think around the privacy side, there's also not really a one-size-fits-all approach. You might have a doctor treating a patient, and of course, when a doctor is sitting in front of a patient, there's no issue with providing access to identifiable information. But when a researcher, as Maura spoke to, inside the hospital is conducting a study, you may want to have some sort of institutional review of that study before the data is released. And certainly, if a startup company is coming to you and trying to access data from halfway around the world, even if we think that startup company has an amazing idea that can really help patients, we really want to be careful around how that data is accessed and used, because our level of trust with that user is going to be quite a bit different than it would be with someone inside my organization. So what we ended up with at MD Clone is what we call a multi-layer privacy solution. And it's designed to expose the highest possible utility data that really meets the needs of the end user for the specific use case at hand, while at the same time protecting privacy, definitely always meeting the regulations that are required, but even more than that, providing the institution with its ability to have its own sort of definitions of what does privacy mean to the institution and how does it want to protect the data that it holds, that it's collected from the patients it's serving. And so synthetic data is definitely a crucial part of this platform, of this multi-layer privacy solution, because we're really trying to make this process efficient and scalable. And I turn back to what I began with. I mean, how can a hospital like the Ottawa Hospital become a hub of innovation if it takes 6 months to work on a single project? Or if the hospital can only work on a single project at any given time? With synthetic data technology connected to this sort of dynamic system for data retrieval and data analysis, we can automatically create data on the fly that meets the needs of any user and protects the privacy. So that means that someone can wake up in the morning and have an idea, and by that afternoon can be analyzing data. That approach sometimes means exposing maybe a very small part of the population to that user and not the entire population. Maybe it means removing parts of the some data elements of that population that are deemed for whatever reason higher risk, maybe psychiatric medications. Maybe it means first exposing synthetic data before going to the original data to actually validate something and apply it to improve patient care. A lot of the questions that Maura brought up are really embedded in that design to be flexible. So we're really excited about this dynamic, this flexible approach, and I'm excited personally to get to work with people like Alan and Michael and Maura as we think about how to create an ethical approach that's efficient, scalable, and ultimately can deliver on the really huge potential to uncover information from inside all the data we've collected and ultimately help patients around the world. So with that, Alan, I'll turn it back to you and maybe we can open up for the rest of our panel discussion here.
That's fantastic, Daniel. I know there's going to be some questions that come up. So we talked a bit about what I'll call is the learning health system. The learning health system talks about really kind of three phases: practice to data, that's really being the purview of our EMR, the data to insight or data to knowledge, which is really the action of interacting with the data. And then finally the action, the insight to action, where we do improvement work. And we can see that at a local level with quality improvement. We can see that with a sort of more global level with research and we see a variety of forms of innovation along that continuum. But all of those are a continuum. One thing that we haven't talked at all about is data quality. It's one thing to have access to the data, but how are the data generated? What is the relationship between what actually happened in the real world versus what is captured in the data? How consistent is that over time? I'm just going to put this to you, Daniel, and we'll come to the others. But I'll ask you, what do you see as to the quality of data in healthcare, and how does MD Clone help support that? Because, if we're talking about synthetic data, you're generating the fake data off the real data. If the underlying data is of poor quality, then you've got poor quality synthetic data. So how does MD Clone address the issue of the quality of the data?
It's crucial here. It's and it's fundamental to every study, and it transcends privacy for sure. I mean, we can't do anything meaningful. That doesn't matter again if privacy. We have to protect privacy, but we can't do anything meaningful without high quality data. What MD Clone ended up doing is what I spoke to. We don't disconnect privacy from utility, and Maura spoke to this, and Michael definitely has spoke to this, and I know has a lot more he can share from the perspective of developing therapeutics. You have to be able to trust the underlying data, to trust the insight, to ultimately use the insight to impact the patient care. So what MD Clone has designed is actually starting with the original data, making sure that we're curating, that we're organizing as much data as possible, and making sure that there are really multiple checks on its quality before any end user gets their hands on it. But one of the benefits, I would say, of synthetic data and some of the technologies that we're making available is we get to expose more people to the data. And by exposing more people to the data, not only are we able to come up with better discovery, but we're actually able to help us understand challenges in data quality. And that learning health system you spoke about, Alan, that learning health system is really only possible if we have people participating in it. The more people participating in that learning health system, yes, discovering new insights, but sometimes those insights are realizing that, hey, the lab system we have isn't well calibrated. We got to go back and fix that before we make a patient care decision based on a lab system, based on data that isn't trustworthy. Or we have to be, as we're developing therapeutics, we have to make sure that the use of these medications is without bias. and how do we know about our patient population? So I think these things are all really well tied together, and MD Phone, I mean, fundamentally, we've embedded this data quality as part of the solution, and we want more end users engaged with it, of course, in a safe way, but ultimately to help us learn and help us grow the data sets and grow the insights.
No, I think that's really nailed it. One of the things I learned very early on in my career with data and managing data at the Ottawa Hospital was, you know, the quality of data is a evolution. And that evolution requires the stakeholders, the people who are actually manipulating the data, using the data, entering the data. It means those people who actually know what's going on have to have access to the data. But then you get that chicken and egg phenomenon, which again, I think that the platform that you're describing really addresses. Maybe I'll shift focus, because I would just say that ultimately, like, if we're thinking about learning health systems and we think about what's required for learning, a number of times all of you brought up the issue of trust. And you brought it up in different ways. And I'm going to ask, I'll start with Maura, but I will ask Michael to also speak to trust. I think to a certain extent, Daniel, you covered off trust a little bit in your talk with the quality of the data and also around the privacy framework. But I do think trust is a really important issue that we need to hone in on as we go forward. And maybe we'll ask the lawyer to comment on trust, because she often has to deal with scenarios where trust is either broken or questioned. And so maybe talk to us about trust so that we can create a context for the conversation in this space. Maura, thank you.
Sure. So going back to quality for a second, we may need to have some kind of standards process so that at the point at which the data is created, at Alan's point at the hospital, that he is giving some kind of rating or score or something that lets us know the quality of that data, so that people later have some idea. I would think bias is absolutely critical. If there are certain subpopulations that are underrepresented or overrepresented in the data, that should be made clear from the beginning. I do a lot of work in the area of AI, and I think transparency and explainability are important concepts there, and I think they're going to be important concepts here also. I think people get very upset when they learn after the fact that their data has been used for something. I guess most of us, when we sign on, we realize we're the product if we're not paying for it. Our data is the product. But say we're talking to a mental health app, we might think, okay, they're going to use that to train other counselors or something like that within that system. That's okay. But maybe they're not thinking, oh, they're selling my data to third parties. I don't know if you saw recently, some researchers at Duke found that for a couple of $100s, they could find out all kinds of medical, particularly psychiatric, what medications, who was on various antidepressants for a couple of $100 with their zip code and even more detailed information. And people don't expect that. So I think one is setting up expectations for the original patients so that they understand how this can be used and what the risks are. Because I think if people understand that and know that, they're much more likely to consent and to not have a problem than if down the pike they learn that something's been used in a way that just they could not reasonably have anticipated that was going to be the use. So I think trust goes back to the quality. Trust goes back to preserving privacy. Trust goes back to the frameworks in which we store and protect this information. So I think all of this is interwoven. I don't think trust is a separate issue over here, and all these other issues are different. I think the framework that we build around this and the way we communicate it and so that people can understand, the better off we'll be.
And you certainly talked about some very important ways in which we can encourage the creation of trust. That transparency, the empathy and compassion for people, and then also really being clear about explaining why we're doing it.
And fairness, if they feel it's fair,
Right.
that this isn't being used to harm them, but rather to help them, they're much less likely to get resistance.
Thank you. One thing I will say, there are these stories, right? You talked about there's these stories that go into the news about people out behaving badly, and to a certain extent, we have to put in layers of protection around those people behaving badly, so that, but may in turn impact the most of us who behave well. So I want to talk a little bit about that with Michael. I don't want to put you on the spot there, Michael, but I know it does make it a bit awkward. But there is this perception sometimes that, and Maura brought it up, like there's a perception out there that if you're giving it to a researcher at Waterloo, it's fine, but don't give it to the pharma company who's trying to make money. Well, and I think that's a bit unfair. I think that to the point of fairness, because when you gave your talk, what you spoke about was you're bringing value to patients, improving the health system, and making it more affordable, more equitable for all. Those were the words you used. Those are the values you're bringing to the table. Maybe explain a little bit from your perspective why you think there may be this double standard for whether you're a researcher at Waterloo or you're a researcher within an industry setting.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Alan. Happy to be put on the spot for this. The pharmaceutical sector, the pharmaceutical industry, is the second most hated industry in society, just behind tobacco. And this is one of the reasons why people don't trust us. But I sort of think about, we're a society that likes to typecast, right? We like to typecast people, actors, for example. You had a bad movie, you're now a really bad actor, or you act in these types of movies, that's the type of roles that you play. You're the pharmaceutical company, you're gonna do evil things with our data. And I think we have to realize there are no bad actors, there's just bad actions. So I'm a new parent. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. I'm just learning how to raise kids now. And a lot of times my son, never my daughter, because she's a princess and an angel, always my son, does something bad, and I'm like, that was bad, you're bad. And then my wife will say, no, he's not bad. That action was bad, but he's not bad. Don't tell him he's bad, right? That's true. There's no bad actors, there's just bad actions. And so we have to realize that the pharmaceutical companies, whether it's true or not, people believe there probably are more bad actions coming out of the pharmaceutical industry than not, but there's also a lot of good action. And so for me, I think to build trust, it's about the transparency. It's about letting people know, why do we want your data? And I just told you why we as Roche want real world data. Being very transparent when we use it. Here's what we're gonna do with your data. Here's the protocol. Here's the research we're gonna do. Here's the output that's gonna happen. If it's good or bad, we're gonna tell you what it is. We're gonna publish it. We're bound by law to publish whatever findings that we find. So I think the more transparent we can be about what we're doing with patient data, which is legislatively owned by individual patients, the more transparent we can be, the more trust we can build, and the more we can get out there. But it's a chicken and the egg thing. You have to be able to let us use the data for us to be transparent about our use of the data. And shutting that door before we can get into the room, I think, isn't the solution. So I think if we can just remember, there's no bad actors, there's just bad actions. Some people choose bad movies more often than not, but for the most part, there are good actors with good actions and good intent in the pharmaceutical industry.
Great. I think like implicit in what you were saying is that there's this idea that the purpose for which you're using the information is well understood and is aligned with the purpose of healthcare, and that use, there's guardrails around that use that protect the people who are source of the information.
Yeah, and just to say, like, I think, there will be some use cases where with data where the large majority of the government or the large majority of the public won't agree with it, with respect to, like, if data were to be used for sales and marketing insights, right? I mean, a lot of people, there's probably some ethical concerns around those data, the use of that data. If we're very transparent about our intent and purpose of using data for marketing insights and sales insights, then it's a totally different level of access to those data. Completely unidentifiable, completely aggregate in nature, the same way we would buy sales insights data from any other source. And so I think it's important not to look at who is using the data, but what are they using it for? Because anybody can have a bad action or a good action.
And I guess one of the things that I would just say, like from my perspective as a health researcher, is that if you were thinking about this, there may be a fine line between marketing and identifying patients who would benefit from a therapy. You know what? If there's a population of patients who, for whatever reason, are not getting prescribed a therapy, but they would benefit tremendously from that therapy. Finding out who those people are and finding out ways in which you could help them get access to that therapy. And that it could be funding, it could be language issues, it could be wealth, it could be like access to primary care, it could be what the community they live in, it could be some cultural beliefs. There could be many reasons why they're not accessing the therapy, but the fundamental issue is that therapy is effective in that group and they're not getting it. And so is that marketing or is that research or is that improving the quality of care? And to a certain extent, it's a very fine line between all of those things. And that is, I think, part of the challenge when you layer on the fact that there is this perception sometimes that you describe, which I don't think is quite true that they're right behind tobacco, but if there is a negative perception that clouds the perception then of the behavior and calls it marketing and bad, whereas if it's to a researcher, it's considered good and altruistic. And I think we have to be somehow aware that bias that we all bring to it is present. And try and overcome it. Maybe Daniel, you can talk a little bit about some of the experiences you've had in other jurisdictions. Like Maura said about is this human subject information and like the synthetic data, it's used both for the infrastructure to support quality in institution, but also that reach out to the external environment. And I know it's like we have a particular set of circumstances in Canada, but other countries have slightly different circumstances and approaches. And so it is worthwhile taking a look at that international experience that we've been acquiring.
Indeed. I'll say that by and large, the themes are very similar around the world. By and large, all these things that we're talking about in trusts and patient data and protection of patient data, they manifest themselves in regulations that have very similar themes and practical implications. There are definitely some differences, and that's why, again, we've designed our solution to be dynamic and sort of adapt to different places. Some organizations, some entities need to have more control over who accesses the data, where the data is stored. The ability to aggregate data is different in different jurisdictions. In some places, synthetic data sort of transcends. In some regulations, synthetic data doesn't really exist as a concept. In other places, in the EU, they've started to more contemplate it, for example. And so it's not necessarily really well understood yet what that means, but at least it's being contemplated. So there's definitely there's definitely some particulars that are different, but the common themes are really the same. And I would actually throw a bit of a maybe it's a bit of a wrench in the discussion, but I wanted to bring it up based on Maura's comments, and then also where Michael was going, that one of the questions that we have, and this is maybe a bit of a behavioral economics type of a topic to bring up, but in many cases, the more we tell patients about how we're going to protect the privacy of their data, the more we tell them what we're going to do, the less they're going to want to share their data. And how do we combat that? That's a hard thing to deal with. And I would turn to where Michael went, and Alan, where you went. We really have to show the value of this data. We really have to combat that fear, combat the bad actors with demonstrating that this data really holds meaningful information, and we can do it in a safe way. And synthetic data is a huge, huge, huge opportunity for us to expose data to so many more people in a safe way, but to expose it in such a way that it can be used to really uncover new insights, new information, new therapies, new treatments. But we have to do it. So I'm almost turning to you, Alan. You're the hospital here. You're the one who collects the data and has the data, and we really got to get that in the hands of more people. And I'm excited to help make that possible and see what that can do for the industry.
Well, thanks. And, we are doing work in this area. We're implementing that MD clone. We're working with Maura and Helen Chen and other folks at Waterloo to, progress our understanding of the ethical and standards, the ethical standards, but also the use standards that we can apply, as well as trying to make that information, that synthetic data available, and do an action-based learning kind of approach. And so there will be more to come on that. I would just say, we do have a real challenge in front of us. Dr. Burns mentioned at the start where we're going to be in 2030, like that, and those are facts, okay? Like the fact of the impending demographic changes, that's not if it happens, it's when it happens. And if we continue down the same track with our spending on healthcare and with our human resources and physical plant, we are not going to our capital investment in physical plant. We're not going to be able to meet the needs of our society. So we will need to change. And the only way to change and the only way to learn how to make the system better is through the use of data. So we do need innovative approaches. Maybe just to finish up, I'm going to hand over to, I'll first ask Michael, because you had your chance, Daniel, there to say the final words. I'll ask Michael to say a few final words, and then I'll ask Maura to sort of wrap it up with some very strong comments about where she sees this going. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just real quick then, in terms of, I think we're at an extremely exciting point. I say that whenever a new technology comes out that's going to allow us to share data more readily and more purposefully, but I really do think, it's iterative and it's a building process, and we're at another extremely exciting point. So for all the young researchers out there, the young students looking to get into this area, it's just incredible what the promise and the potential of data and the ability to analyze data are going to be. And if we continue pushing and developing technologies, becoming entrepreneurs, developing companies, and just creating true value out of all of this, the better we're going to make society and the better we're going to make health for patients.
Thanks, Michael. I know, Maura, you started us off by describing what the opportunities are and the challenges. I think we've touched on all of them as we've gone through this. Maybe just a final word to you to say what you think we should, maybe what we should take away from what we just talked about and what the next steps are in your opinion.
Sure. So I would agree we're at a pivotal point, and I think it's critical to get this right, because if we over-regulate it, it will be useless. If it takes 6-8 months to get authorization, things aren't going to move. If we under-regulate it, the first time we have a disaster and there's a really bad PR outcome for a particular group, it's dead. So I think getting the framework right from the beginning is really important, and having the right stakeholders at the table. I know in Helen and my work, we have an Indigenous scholar who's working with us, and we're going to try to get it right. And that's it's Goldilocks. It's just getting the porridge right. So it's safe, but it's still useful. It's balancing those two and finding that sweet spot where this data can get out there and can be used, but it's still protective enough that people don't get harmed.
Thank you. And that's the second time we've used the Goldilocks today about Waterloo, but I will say that I think we're at the right spot. And there is a reason why the Ottawa Hospital is reaching out to you, Waterloo, to help drive this forward. And that reason is because there are people like me, Maura, and there's people like Helen, and all of the other faculty members that I know are there that I've had some opportunities to meet along the way. And I think having that policy framework and approach, as well as people who can actually use it, I think will be a very exciting opportunity for healthcare in Canada, but also healthcare globally. So I'm looking forward to the next set of collaborations, and I hope the audience enjoyed the presentation as much as I enjoyed speaking to these people and learning from them. And back, Carly, maybe back over to you for closing this out and handing us over to the next speaker.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to your time, to all of our panelists. It was a very insightful discussion. I will just check in on our audience and see if there are any questions that you would like to ask. I think we have time just for one, if there's anyone that wants to put anything forward. And while you're thinking about it, I would just like to draw the parallel from conversations that we heard yesterday. You know, the things that make us individuals in society really do determine our health. And Ashnur Rahim from the KW for OHT yesterday said, you know, it might be surprising because it seems like common sense that these things are built in and considered when our healthcare services are being designed and being deployed. But that hasn't always been the case. So I think it's been really exciting to hear the panel talk today about putting that information back into the data that they're analyzing to, you know, really bring us the next great level of service that we all deserve here. So I will, and if there are any questions, you can raise your hand. All right, that's fine because we're over time anyways. So thank you again to the panel. We really appreciate all of your comments. All right, everyone, we'd like to get started with our next panel discussion. We're going to continue the data conversation. Thank you. Up next is our second panel of the day, entitled Making Sense of It All, Data-Driven Healthcare Transformations in Canada. So welcome to our moderator. This is Darren Hay, Vice President of Business Development at Medio, which is a hypertech company, to lead the conversation, and I'll allow him to introduce the rest of the panelists.
Awesome. Thank you, Carly. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to be, I guess, the final act for the day and try to wrap it up on a big note for you, Carly. Joining me today are three friends and colleagues who are really leading the charge of data-driven healthcare transformation in Canada and around the world. So super excited to have them join me on the panel. Karina Guy is Accenture's Managing Director, Applied Intelligence in Healthcare and Life Sciences, nationally for the Canadian market. I got that title right, Karina. Dale Hall is the Executive Vice President at Toronto-based ThoughtWire and co-founder of ThoughtWire, leading provider of digital twin-based smart hospital, smart healthcare solutions. And finally, Josh Liu is the CEO of SeamlessMD, Canada's leading digital care journey platform and Can Health Network's 2022 Company of the Year, Josh. Nice to have you all here, and great to see everybody. So as Carly mentioned, I'm I run business development strategic partnerships for a company called Medio. It's the healthcare arm of a Montreal-based large IT company, multinational called Hypertech Group, proud partners of the University of Waterloo and CBB. Just for a little bit of context on this discussion, Medio is the logistics and scalability partner behind most of the major digital health and remote patient monitoring programs across Canada and the US. For example, in Canada, we are behind the scenes scaling Ontario Health, Eastern Health in Canada. In the US, we run programs like Optum, United Health Group, Anthem, Geisinger, UPMC, most of the major programs where there's a hardware component, a digital health component that needs to get the patients to collect data to drive scale. We're behind those programs. So if you have a glucometer, a weight scale, a pulse oximeter that was prescribed by your physician, many is a very, very high likelihood that that came out of a Medio facility, either Mississauga, Indianapolis, or Phoenix, Arizona. So I guess in many ways, we're kind of contributing to the issue that we're talking about today in the sense that we're driving the proliferation of technology, digital health innovation, which is resulting in more and more data being collected, which is really leading to sort of this mountain of data that we need to really start making sense of. We know there's a lot of health data. Consumer adoption is growing, provider adoption is growing. And as we do, the challenge is really around how do we gather all this data? How do we start making sense of the data? How do we start leveraging in a way that it doesn't sit in silos? It's really used to make timely and effective clinical decisions. And that's really what we want to dive into this session. When we're looking to design it, we really wanted to advance a dialogue on how to leverage the data, looking at analytics, looking at advanced health tech in Canada, while really focusing on two key things. One was to highlight there's some really incredible thought leadership happening in Canada. And I think being able to highlight the thought leadership in mapping out what the future state's going to look like for making all this data usable, make it valuable to providers, make it valuable to payers, make it valuable to patients. And second is, I think I wanted to make sure we sort of focused on highlighting the fact that there's some really strong Canadian companies who are way ahead of the curve and are really leading the charge on making the data make sense. And I think realistically, Carly and team, this is an entirely different conference or session that just on that piece alone. But I think being able to have some of the leaders here, folks like Josh and folks like Dale, to be able to talk through what they're doing is going to be very powerful. So in this session, I'm going to ask Karina to really kick this off, provide an overview of how data is transforming care through Accenture's lens. And then we'll dive in and talk about what Dale and the ThoughtWire team are doing and what Josh and Seamless team are doing before we dive into some Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Karina.
Great. Thanks, Darren. All right, just making sure. There we go. The slides are up. Fantastic. So a couple of things, just if we move on to the next slide, let's really talk about what it means to have data-driven healthcare reinvention and how important that is to the Canadian landscape and what we want to be able to achieve by way of health outcomes. We're embarking on a new era in healthcare in which there's a distinct opportunity to make sure that patients and their care teams are at the center of everything we do. But that's against a landscape of increased players that are coming into the industry and that are getting involved in healthcare. And that can include, for example, private employer insurances. Accenture, for example, we have additional digital health services or digital pharmacy that's offered through our employer health plan. There's greater increase in consumer demand, looking for innovative experiences that they gain in retail and banking when they're interacting with those types of providers. Appropriately so, Canadians are also looking for better access and better services that are more personalized and customized to their needs, and to ensure that there are no broken journeys. Government, of course, is looking for and demanding lower cost so that we can preserve and, in fact, continue to sustain our public pay healthcare system. And of course, data and technology is creating all new possibilities against a healthcare system that is becoming more and more complex. Next slide. What that means is that healthcare organizations now need to make the right decisions, and they need to make really smart moves to stake out their place in this new healthcare landscape. There's an amazing opportunity for health authorities, departments of health and their agencies, boards, and commissions at the provincial level to make sure that all of the work they're doing with vendors in the community have patients and families at their center, and that we're really trying to humanize the work that's being done by clinicians and other members of the care team so that we are providing services that enable collective well-being, not just of the patient and their caregivers and their families, but also of the providers and the hardworking frontline professionals that are caring for patients. Not many of you may know Accenture, but we are a partner of choice for improving access and experience and those related outcomes in healthcare by harnessing the power of technology and human ingenuity. And we're known for in particular, some of the incredible assets that we've created for healthcare in the technology space. I'll be giving you a couple of those examples, but also partnering with organizations like ThoughtWire and Medeo and others in how we deliver those services to clients. Next slide. One of the things that's really critically important to understand as well is that everything we do in healthcare has an objective around the quadruple aim. And for those of you who don't know what the quadruple aim is, it's improving patient experience, enhancing and optimizing provider experience. It's improving our population health and the quality of our health outcomes in addition to equity. And it's making sure that we are delivering health services at a manageable cost. So seeking tangible cost reduction. Accenture recently did a survey of our Canadian and US healthcare clients, and no surprise, close to 100%, so 96% of the leaders we surveyed said that their applied intelligence plans, so everything related to data and analytics and augmented and applied intelligence, was important to their role as an organization and their efforts to reach their equity goals to ensure improved population health outcomes. All respondents indicated that improving patient experience and promoting personalized care pathways and enabling precision care was of a significant priority. Improving the daily experience of healthcare providers. So 99% indicated that that was a top priority, particularly post-pandemic when there is so much provider burnout. And of course, Canadians in particular, but not surprisingly, US stakeholders and health system representatives in the survey indicated that tangible cost reduction is important because regardless of whether you are a for-profit or not-for-profit healthcare system, managing cost and being able to provide the right care at the right cost, at the right time to the right patient with the right care team and using the right technology is still important. Next slide. So what does it mean when we talk about data-driven or data-led transformation in healthcare? What do you need to have in place? Well, this is a pretty simple diagram, but obviously there's a lot behind it. When we talk about value and realization, this means that your executive team for any organization needs to understand and recognize the importance of the data that they have available, how the data that they have available and at their fingertips can be used for health and business benefit, i.e. in the Canadian context, that would be running the health system efficiently. Further, what's also important is value identification and business case development, because data and insights are costly. And sometimes we fail, and we fail hard and we fail early. And in order to have and sustain the right experimentation with some of the augmented insights that we are typically looking at in healthcare, you need to have the sustained support of executive. And so making sure that value identification and business cases are done so that it's clear how we're going to get from A to B, that we may make mistakes along the way. The data may be imperfect. It may be of low quality. Our algorithm may not be right the first time, but that we are going to see it through and really understand and reach the value that's intended for that business insight and how it's supposed to drive value in the system. We also have to have a data strategy in place, a really foundational operating model, and appropriate funding mechanisms. On the intelligent data and platform side, obviously the move to cloud has been critical. We need to have, our basics of data science and analytics that go from descriptive and diagnostic analytics to predictive and prescriptive analytics to make sure that we are looking at all of the information and the use cases that we can manage with the data that we've got. Machine learning operations is becoming more and more critical to make sure that we have practices to help deploy and maintain ML systems that are in design and production. We have to make sure that where a health authority or a Ministry of Health has partnered with us and other vendors, that there's an ecosystem partnership forming such that all players in the ecosystem and vendors like us that are providing services are willing to work together for the benefit of patients, families, health system, and for general population health outcomes, because our solutions are never one-off. They're very much integrated. And that includes integration for outcomes as well as for things like security and compliance. And of course, oftentimes, because some of the work that we are doing is newer and more leading edge, it is imperative that we have the right talent acquisition and retention strategies in place, that we have agile processes for delivery, and that we can choose to collaborate across partners like ourselves and ThoughtWire, for example, to make sure we're delivering value to the health systems that we are serving. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what's coming. I'm going to jump to quantum computing for a second, just because I'm sure throughout the conference you've heard of some pretty exciting things that can be done with healthcare data. But as we move to quantum on the horizon, we'll be able to look at very advanced clinical decision support, assistance with diagnostics, precision medicine, which is now becoming much more of a reality, as well as intelligent cost management, which for us Canadians is pretty critical in preserving and sustaining our public pay system, while we understand that there are private pay options that are complementing the public system and that will, as the public system is, take advantage of significant advances in data analytics and technology. Next slide. I'm going to give you a little bit of a flavor of some of the things we've been doing at Accenture, just to pique your interest before I pass it over to some of my colleagues. One of the applications that we've built for quantum computing in healthcare is what we call quantum enhanced radiotherapy. Our product is used to help identify and improve customized treatments, and to actually take a look at the angles for radiation beams to help increase and augment the benefit and reduce collateral damage. This is something that I certainly appreciate. I had a family member recently go through radiotherapy for treatment of a certain condition, and making sure that you choose methods that are going to reduce collateral damage is incredibly important to the speed with which that patient recovers and their overall quality while they're going through treatment, quality of life while they're going through treatment. Next slide. The other kinds of things we're working on are things like quantum kidney exchange. So we created an algorithm where we looked at the opportunity to improve the matching of kidney donors and recipients. We started out by looking at a sample model. We created a machine learning algorithm, looked at the various ways that we could solve our problem using D-Wave hybrid. And eventually our solution, based on a number of different runs, had significant success in matching donors and recipients. We've done this as well recently in Canada, and it's public with Nova Scotia and another vendor called Medable, where we've been looking at decentralized clinical trials in Nova Scotia and matching rural and rural remote patients with clinical trials to significant success. And of course, in some cases where we developed these solutions, we are applying for a patent and some IP along with our partners, as well as our health system customers. So these are pretty exciting things that we're doing at Accenture. But while there may be super exciting assets, if we turn to the next slide, as you know, right now, we have some big challenges to meet in improving and optimizing how patients flow and access and flow through our health systems in order to optimize care. And while using data to improve patient care is critical, it's also really needed to improve whole health systems. How do we do that? By creating a digital twin of the whole or parts of a real world healthcare system. And in this way, we can obtain the vital stats on how our systems are doing in real time. And that's where companies like ThoughtWire come in. So I'm going to be passing it over to Dale to show you the art of the possible with looking at digital twins in healthcare.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Karina. I appreciate it. Dale, just before you jump in real quick, I mean, I think one of the things, Karina, that jumps out of me from that presentation is not just the focus of Accenture on the analytics component, but the focus on the partnership component in this. And I think that's a part that Canada, I think, is in a very good position for, is that there's really good companies working together. And I think that can be accelerated and enhanced. And, you know, we'll talk about, you know, funding models, all that stuff, but I think that partnership piece is huge. So that sort of, you know, using data across the full continuum of care is something that, you know, obviously we should dig into a little bit here, but I'll pass over to you now, Dale.
Okay, great. So we'll move to the next slide. So a little bit about ThoughtWire. We started the company in 2009, and the founders, and myself included, had been working on actually really large healthcare transformation projects, and particularly in Ontario, but also across Canada. And, you know, that was the circa of time that everyone was focused on electronic health records and, you know, creating large databases of healthcare data, which is very valuable and certainly important. But one of the things that we found was that we need to also combine the value of all these siloed data sources. That was one of the key reasons that we started the company, to provide better decision-making to frontline workers, to support more proactive care models and more in-the-moment understanding about all the data available to them to help with those decisions. Next slide. So one of the key problem areas, and unfortunately this slide didn't come in super well in the copy, I guess, but one of the key problem areas that we found was that human middleware was the new norm. And what we found, or what we feel human middleware is the requirement for frontline staff or operations staff or administrative staff for that matter, to interact with a number of different application interfaces, providing little bits of information across those, like patient context or conditions or searching for lab results and so on, and tying those together in their own mind to support their workflow. So we set about, you know, trying to resolve that problem by helping to automate the process of pulling together information in real time to support people in their job at the front line doing workflow. Next slide, please. So we created ThoughtWire OS, and ThoughtWire OS is our digital twin platform. And what is a digital twin? Well, it's, in our point of view, it isn't a pretty spatial model of my building or my space or you know, even the metaverse, as some might want to think of it, but it is a representation of all the data available to me to do my job, to get better care, to provide a better experience for me as a patient or a resident or as a clinician or as a staff in healthcare facilities. So the way we do that is, you know, much like a human sense, thinks, and acts on information provided to them. We do the same. We created our platform and our expert systems AI, which is a core part of that, to be able to observe data within the environment in a hospital, as an example. So that means we're connected to key sources of data like the EMR, like laboratory information systems or radiology systems, et cetera, but also to other types of data sources like IoT devices or telemetry monitors, as an example, right? Pulling all that information together, along with understanding of what's happening in the physical space, the building itself. So we connect in the building systems to be able to observe that the environment that I'm in is also promoting and supporting care of patients and residents. So once we have that data, we normalize it in standardized forms. So clinical data as an example, we use HL7 FHIR data ontologies to represent that data effectively in a standardized point of view. And once it is available to us, now we can apply AI to observe changes, ever ongoing changes of that data within a digital twin, that replica, if you will, of people, processes, assets, and facilities, right? With those observations, we can apply business rules against it to trigger actions, to trigger providing new information to frontline staff through mobile devices or applications to trigger them to act on issues that they need to support patients in all types of healthcare organizations. Next slide. And when we say digital twin, it isn't a single digital twin, at least in the context of our platform. It's hundreds and potentially thousands of digital twins, each representing information relevant to patients, to the facility itself, to the clinical staff supporting patients in different types of healthcare organizations. And then defining and observing relationships between all those parties to help drive workflow, a twin of twins, if you will, right? Next slide. So I think to drive that home a little bit further, we'll take a real world example. One of the key solutions that we're delivering in Ontario, and in particular, our early warning network. With early warning, it's obviously very much used in acute care settings and hospitals in particular. The notion of early warning is to take some key factors like vital signs and observe changes in those to identify if a patient is deteriorating. And it is obviously very effective and critical to use those types of techniques to observe when patients need additional support, when clinical providers need to intervene to support a patient before a never event happens, before a cardiac arrest or other type of event like sepsis or what have you occurs. So when those scores that we're pulling from telemetry devices, or we're providing a means for capturing that data through our applications, when we observe those scores at a certain point, we can then force action to take place through collaboration of all different types of healthcare providers. And it's really that collaboration that is the key, drives the key benefits, right? We're getting the right information to the right people. Everyone is aware of what's happening, what role they have in making sure that this patient is supported. And obviously, doing all that activity creates a great deal of analytics as well, which we can now use to support improvements in clinical process, right? You can imagine every event that we manage through our digital twin has a timestamp associated with it, right? So we're basically creating a digital flight recorder of all activities that are happening inside a hospital that can then be replayed, if you will, and used to promote improvements or efficiency gains within the operations of that facility. So with great success in acute care settings, we've now branched out into a broader part of the healthcare ecosystem to include long-term care homes. And I think we all observed during the course of the COVID epidemic that we have a real underserved community of Ontarians and Canadians that are living in long-term care residences. And unfortunately also, they don't always have the same types of technology, the same levels of staffing that exist in acute care centers. So in many ways, they're even more in need of these types of techniques to provide data to them, to use their limited staffing inside those homes to support residents, as we can observe through technology and through increased interaction with our long-term care residents, when we need to engage with them and ensure that they don't deteriorate and require an ED visit to acute care or any other type of negative event. So all this type of activity and this increased data, this increased observability improves not only the day in the life of long-term care residents inside long-term care settings, it also helps to prevent transfers from long-term care to acute care settings, thereby putting further strain on an already strained system. Okay, next slide, please. So in practice, how does that work? We talked about the capturing of vital signs, either directly through telemetry devices or indirectly through the manual input of certain factors. But we're also integrating all that data back into the source of truth, the EMRs, if you will, that exist in facilities, and capturing data, healthcare data, along with operational data that can then be used by the health facility, the health system, and the province to be able to better identify where gaps in healthcare are occurring and adjust via funding accordingly. The deterioration observations are being made through AI, being applied in real time. And then AI again is hoping to orchestrate who needs to know when and where they are to make sure that they can jump in and leap into action and support the patient as required. So a more proactive response, again, thereby reducing some of the demand on healthcare staffing and the facility itself. And obviously everything is data driven, right? And as a consequence, very, very rich analytics to drive things like further machine learning against the data that we're capturing. Next slide. So key themes that we're just with our early warning network solution that we're trying to provide back into the healthcare ecosystem, obviously increased productivity by providing the information necessary, raising key alerts and issues front and center to care providers so that no one is left in the dark of issues that might be occurring. Obviously improving the health and well-being of patients and residents as a consequence to that. So they will be observed if issues are occurring. Obviously improve care outcomes as a result of that. And through proactive care, right, we can now, as Karina pointed out, help to also reduce the burden on the health system as a whole, in particular acute care settings, right? We're able to leverage either long-term care or other settings outside hospitals to help provide care closer to the resident, closer even in the case of hospital at home, dealing with patients in an environment that promotes healthcare for them. And then that's it. The unified network approach allows us the data available at a health system level, again, to support and promote funding opportunities for health system policymakers to adjust where we're spending money and hopefully do it in an effective way as resources are very scarce.
Awesome. Thank you, Dale. I think it's very interesting to me. I know ThoughtWire's got very strong results in the hospital sector. I know the early warning network is showing very strong promise in connecting the long-term care sector with the acute sector. I think what's interesting, just the conversation with Karina before, is as you start expanding it out, it kind of hits, Josh, it's starting to hit your sweet spot, which is being able to leverage the digital care journeys, leverage remote patient monitoring, really drive the efficiencies with that data. So I think you've definitely seen that partnership model evolve, and you're going to see Canadian healthcare, digital health, you're going to see a lot of Venn diagrams when you start looking at people. And I think that's kind of drives the need to sort of partner on this stuff. Josh, I'm going to pass over to you because I think Seamless has, I think, one of the best stories I think I've heard in Canadian digital health, and it's being accepted worldwide. So I'd love to hear you explain a little bit about it.
You got it. Thanks, Darren, for the intro. Thanks, everyone, for the opportunity to share our story and learnings today. So you can go to the next slide. I'll start giving more context for myself and the story. So my name is Josh Lee. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of SeamlessMD, but I actually started off in the clinical world. So I did my training in medicine in Toronto over a decade ago, and I fell more in love with broader healthcare system problems and kind of less so in day-to-day clinical stuff. I ended up actually doing work at UHN on trying to understand why patients who were discharged from hospital were often being readmitted back to hospital within, let's say, a few weeks or a month, and wondering, well, if we could have just better engaged and monitored patients outside the four walls of the hospital, could we have prevented an issue and a readmission earlier? So that was kind of the genesis for SeamlessMD. And really the problem space that we play in is that patient journey. And so whether you're a patient or a caregiver of one, whether you're going through a surgery, a cancer journey, or a maternity care journey or something else, this story might be familiar to you. Often you're given lots of paper and verbal instructions, and patients will tell us that they lose that information, they forget it, there's no day-to-day reinforcement, and so it's hard to follow. And providers will tell us that they often feel as if they are sending a patient into a black hole between visits, especially after discharge from hospital. And if only we could keep a better eye on patients outside the four walls, could we have caught something earlier? And ultimately, if patients can't be adherent to their instructions and your healthcare team can't monitor you properly, bad things can happen. That can be higher than expected length of stay or recovery time in the hospital, avoidable visits back to the hospital, and ultimately higher costs for the system. Next slide. Now, those problems are not new. One of the challenges, though, is when we're in a primarily fee-for-service model, there's been limited incentive historically, unfortunately in Canada, to actually care to improve outcomes and lower costs when we're getting paid to just do more volume for patients. That being said, though, our healthcare system, especially the last couple of years, has faced an amount of new pressures where it actually makes sense to want to engage and monitor patients outside the four walls. And we've seen kind of three major forces the last couple of years. One is certainly the pandemic. So COVID, as people know, has created a lot of backlogs in care. So for example, a lot of surgeries, millions have been backlogged across the country and the continent. The second major shift that we've seen is because the healthcare system is financially unsustainable, we're spending way too much money. There's an ongoing shift from a fee-for-service world, paying for every test, paying for every visit, to more of a value-based care world, meaning paying your doctors, paying your healthcare providers and hospitals more on how well you take care of patients and how well we control costs. And so, for example, the US has been really progressive, where now more than 40% of healthcare payments are tied to quality and value and not just volume of stuff done for patients. And then lastly, staff burnout's on the rise. And so we're asking our healthcare teams to do more for patients at a lower cost, and yet they have fewer and fewer staff resources and time available. Next slide. And so these pressures have made it important to use technology to actually engage and monitor patients outside the four walls. And so what does SeamlessMD do? So on the patient end, we provide a platform that the patient can access on their phone, their tablet, or through the desktop browser to digitally guide patients step by step across a journey like a surgery, and then allow the care team to monitor them. So as a patient, you can see here that, let's say you're going through a knee surgery, you get day-by-day reminders and education of how to prepare for your surgery, when to start and stop medications, when to stop eating and drinking. after surgery, you get, videos or education on how do I do my recovery exercises? How do I get the best outcome? And then very importantly, we empower patients to track data about how they're doing. So patients are tracking their symptoms, their vitals, their pain levels, photos of their incision. And then if the issue is not a huge issue, we can give patients immediate feedback on what to do at home. So if you have constipation after surgery, not uncommon, let us know that, and boom, we give you instructions on how to manage constipation at home. Next slide. But 20% of the time, patients report an issue that is higher risk. Maybe your incision is red and swollen and there's pus coming out of it, or something else concerning. Well, in those cases, we can actually escalate that data and that issue to the healthcare team. So we can send alerts and dashboards to the nursing staff at the hospital, and they can monitor your incisions, your symptoms remotely, pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, you know what? Your surgical incision is looking a bit infected. We're going to prescribe you antibiotics remotely to treat that infection right away so that it doesn't get worse and so you don't end up back in hospital. Next slide. And one of the really amazing things is that the adoption of this across the country has been phenomenal, especially the last couple of years. So we're doing work anywhere from rural Ontario with Thunder Bay Regional Hospital, all the way to Sunnybrook in Toronto, all the way to Nova Scotia and Horizon Health in Atlantic Canada and across the board. But also this innovation has been exported to lots of major US health systems as well, from Stanford to UC Davis and others. Next slide. And I think that the really exciting thing is that it's not just great from a patient experience point of view, but what's really drove excitement and adoption has been the focus on actually meaningfully improving health outcomes. We've never actually sponsored a clinical trial or a study. All of the data that's come out about our solution has been done by our clinical partners on their own, and they've produced amazing results. You can see here across many different areas, whether it's orthopedics or women's health or cardiology, we're seeing reductions in hospital length of stay, readmissions, cost, mortality even. Last slide, one more please. But I think the most important thing is the impact on patients. Patients are telling us that it's made their experience better. They're less anxious. And so often they're telling us, you know what, this helped save my life because it helped myself and my care team catch a blood clot earlier, catch an infection earlier. And so it's amazing to see that now that we're able to help patients track data remotely, that data can be used to dramatically change the trajectory of a patient's health. So that's it. Thank you for the time and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that I wanted to just maybe a few questions to know we're kind of getting on in time here. One of the questions I wanted to zero in a bit on is we tend to think of Canadian companies and Canadian innovators as making innovation for Canada. And I think, Josh, you just gave a good example. I know, Dale, you've got some examples. I think there's a really good argument for exportable Canadian innovation, where it actually works for Canadians, it drives better health outcomes, better efficiencies in the healthcare system in Canada. But I think there's also an opportunity to start looking at it from an export perspective. Josh, I know you've got some views on it. Maybe Dale and Karina, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So for us, our whole company's headquartered in Ontario, and we did all our R&D initially in Ontario. The challenge that we had for the first several years was we would make this innovation in Canada, but there weren't enough incentives in Canada to get a lot of adoption. So we actually did most of our business in the US. So we were building this thing in Canada and we're helping all these patients and providers in the US. And it wasn't until COVID hit that the government here said, hey, you know what? We need more digital health to actually help reduce the backlog in Ontario and in Canada. So in the last few years, our adoption has skyrocketed in Canada because it's become prioritized. And so the funny thing is that this innovation was working and was good pre-COVID, but it took a crisis in Canada for it to become important. And so, we know we can make great innovation in Canada, but we just need the right incentives in place to actually take advantage of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, in particular, I know the Penn Health program is a great one where, it's really designed to help promote the use of Canadian technologies within Canadian health institutions. I think that, some of the Ontario government efforts, particularly, during COVID, to really spawn the use of made in Ontario innovations, in healthcare in particular, you're very valuable. I think that's got to become the norm and not just a, what points in time investment. I think we have a great opportunity here to export great technology. We've got great companies in part represented here, but many more in the ecosystem. And our health system aligns with many around the world, UK, Australia, and many others. And I think it provides us a great opportunity to engage with those. And we certainly are doing that with really good engagement.
So how do we, because it aligned, at least another question that's kind of burning in the back of my mind is just around, because the value-based funding piece and funding incentives make a lot of sense. What really needs to change in the Canadian healthcare system to accelerate the adoption? So data-driven health innovation, we know there's a funding mechanism piece to it. We know, and I don't want to spend the whole time on funding because that'd be a whole discussion, but I think it'd be interesting, Karina, get your thoughts around, what exactly can we do to drive this forward? I think value-based care is obviously a huge discussion point. And Josh, to your point, looking at the growth of Medicare or Medicare Advantage in the US and how that's actually been leveraged to drive the adoption of digital health technologies across the board is very interesting. And I think that, it's something we can take up here. The challenge is in Canada, you always have this disconnect between who pays and who benefits from a healthcare funding perspective. So it's a deep conversation. It's one that, obviously we got to be open to having, but Karina, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I concur with a lot of the points that you've just made. I would also say, though, that there are a couple of things that we need to address within the Canadian context. One is a misapplication and misinterpretation of privacy and data protection legislation, privacy in particular, that has characterized the way in which the appropriate sharing and access to data in order to promote patient care and serve patients has been limited in ways that likely now we see had a very chilling effect on our ability to use clinical data appropriately for good. And when I mean for good, I mean for the care of the patient, for improving care and processes, for reducing, if we look at our translational research in this country, it's abysmal, for reducing time from research to application and practice. We need to really rethink how we've looked at privacy and how it's been, as I said, misapplied. I think that's one. I think standards and interoperability is another. So I'm very fortunate to do a lot of work with Canada Health InfoWay and with the provincial governments in the formulation and adoption of interoperability standards. I think that value-based care is also going to change the way we think about the appropriate use of data to improve care and improve the health system. And that's going to be another driver that will better enhance sharing to an appropriate level that I think is warranted with the security and data de-identification features that we have at our disposal today.
Agreed. And I think it's interesting to see a lot of those things we talk about, standards, interoperability, and privacy, and the willingness to share across provinces in Canada is going up dramatically. I mean, I think, Dale, you mentioned, how fast things are moving in Canada, or Josh, you mentioned, things are definitely moving much quicker in Canada, and there's a much more spirit of collaboration nationwide, which is very positive.
I think one other item I think is a concern when I look at the ratios of expenditure on technology solutions in the Canadian context versus the American context, as an example. They just spend more on technology, and I think to some degree that's a recognition that throwing more people at a problem, because we're concerned about making sure we have right staff, nurse to patient ratios, et cetera, which is critically important. However, we know that we will not be able to achieve that in many cases. We already had a decline in terms of the number of new folks entering the healthcare resources workforce. Now we have a critical, even more acute issue post-COVID as a result of burnout and people leaving the profession. So I think we really need to focus and double down on the use of technology to drive efficiencies to deal with the problem. We have less people today to support, an aging population as they unfortunately need to engage more with the healthcare system. It is a big problem, and certainly it's one that we're really focused on hoping to try and tackle.
Excellent.
I do. Oh, sorry. I just want to. Yeah, I think one thing I want to commend the Canadian ecosystem on is once the innovation does start to take off, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, Darren, there is so much rich collaboration happening across the country that I don't even see in the U.S. sector. So, for example, for us, let's say in Ontario, all these Ontario hospitals, because they are truly collaborating, they're not competing in the market. They will share our innovation around. They will share how they used our platform. They'll share content. They'll share workflows. They'll work together. And so everyone learns together and promotes it and motivates each other faster. Whereas in the US context, yeah, maybe they're friendly with each other, but often they're competing for patient market share. And so we see a lot less collaboration between health systems in the US. And so, once it takes off in Canada, we can actually move a lot faster and be a learning system a lot faster because, we have that single payer. We all are motivated towards helping, all Canadians. And so I think I do want to commend Canada on that. It's just that if we just need that sort of takeoff to get started. But once that innovation takes off, we really can move so much faster than some other countries. So I just hopefully we don't lose sight of that. We just have to help get it off the ground in a lot of places.
Josh, I think that's a super positive place to leave this discussion. I'm just looking at the time right now. So I think, I think what we've shown you today is there's a lot of thought leadership here. There's a lot of really, good innovation that's coming out of Canada that's driving, efficiencies, health outcomes, better access to care, better health equity. That conversation needs to continue, obviously. I think after this, I know that Karina, Dale, Josh, and I are more than happy to talk to anyone. If you want to connect anybody in the audience with us, you've got our email. You can track us down. I'm sure you got our cell phone somewhere. You can try to track us down that way too. Happy to have that conversation. And Dale, Karina, Josh, I really appreciate the time. And thanks for having us, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the comments. And yes, absolutely, I can connect anyone who's interested in speaking to our panel members. I think it was really interesting. Thank you for mentioning, our funding models, and Can Health, especially here at Waterloo, has, made a lot of projects start here in collaboration with our local hospitals and companies that I think are going to make a big difference. And commenting that Canada, does have the ability to move quickly, I think is really appreciated. We do have a couple of pre-submitted questions, and I think, again, that's by nature of Waterloo being an educational institution. People are curious about what jobs are available for life science students and for math and computer students that want to start working in this new digital revolution in health. Maybe Karina, we can start with you.
Absolutely. Oh, so many jobs. I wouldn't even know where to start. If you think about the spectrum of applied intelligence in healthcare and life sciences here at Accenture, we have numerous teams. And of course, even though I'm talking about these teams as if they're separate teams, they're not. And in fact, we have practitioners that can move from one team to another because of their skill and passion and things like that. So you've got, data science professionals who are really focused on, the models and the actual aspect of the modeling and the problem solving. We've got analytics professionals who are maybe more focused on the bigger picture analysis, the creation of the visualizations of that information. We've got others that are data engineers. We've got machine learning engineers and ML ops professionals, AI and data strategy professionals. We've got others that are more on the data architecture and data management side. And then those of us that are what I love to call jack of all trades, master of one, where we're really deep in one area, but we sort of are smart enough and have enough industry experience that we've dabbled across, other adjacent areas for several years. And so honestly, all I can say to students today is, you're very lucky, because coming into the realm of applied intelligence today, there's no perfect educational background. Everyone that you see on the screen here, we laugh because we all came from vastly different backgrounds, and yet we've all converged into this space. Your education is what you make it. Just be curious, be passionate, have a love of solving problems, both big and small, in healthcare and life sciences. It's great if you can get some exposure to health informatics or scientific informatics on the life sciences side, but it's not a prerequisite. You can come from an engineering background, you could come from an arts background, and still be incredibly successful when it comes to things like understanding patient and provider journey and their experience. So we're all coming at this from different directions. Embrace it and just be you.
That is a wonderful thought. Thank you so much. And I think, Josh, you are a perfect example of coming from, being a practicing medical physician and then moving in to start your company. And one thing that really stuck with me was how you said that, Seamless hasn't actually used any of the data from your projects. You've supported the hospitals who have used their own data. So could you comment a little bit on kind of flowing from that, of using the education pieces, and how, you just need to be passionate in an area and go in and support the healthcare system? And where is the space for that?
Yeah, I think Karina said it really well, where my mantra has always been, just follow your curiosity and see where it leads you. So, when we started this journey, I didn't have a plan to go to medical school and then start a healthcare technology company. I was just really curious about preventing readmissions. And then I started reading about startups and technology in my third and fourth years of med school. And then luckily went through an incubator called the Next 36. Some folks here might have heard of that. Met my two co-founders who were brilliant engineers. And we said, hey, why don't we go use technology to solve this readmissions problem? Then we just started talking to a bunch of nurses and physicians, and then started talking to hospitals and learning how they did things. And just, a lot of accidents and mistakes and learnings and evolution. And, there's that phrase of, an overnight success story. Well, reality is it's a 10+ year overnight success story. And hopefully it's a success in some ways, but it's definitely a 10-year overnight story. And so I would echo what Karina said, follow your curiosity. You're going to find some things that you don't like or that you do like. You'll rule things in or out. But if you do that and you just keep exploring your options, you will land in the right place. I think probably everyone on this panel, if you had asked them 10 years ago, like what would they be doing today, we would all have predicted it wrong, And if you ask me what I'm doing 10 years from now, I would probably predict that wrong too. But I think if you stay open-minded and you just are willing to try new things, you end up in a place that works for you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I will go to our in-person audience. If anyone has a question, please don't be shy to raise your hand. All right, seeing none and being conscious of the time, I'll let the panelists, do you have any closing statements that you would like to make before we say goodbye today?
I guess just on the previous question, I know one of my key staff started off in engineering, transitioned partway through into nursing, then transitioned again into healthcare informatics. And I think, you don't need to focus your entire journey on one path. I think you always have the opportunity to change directions, to follow, your interests. And I think, everyone or many of you are probably very young and have great opportunities ahead. So follow your heart, if you will.
Thank you so much, Dale. And thank you, Darren, for bringing, this panel together of very insightful people. We all enjoyed the discussion very much today. So thanks again.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you've enjoyed today and yesterday's presentation. So I invite you, if you have, I invite you to visit CBB's homepage, because there are always upcoming events that we put on that are similar to this one. Particularly up there right now is and in our opener, Catherine Burns alluded to it, we have Dr. Mohammed Mondami speaking about using AI to advance healthcare in Canada. So if you want that particular AI focus, then that talk will be for you. It's coming up on March 22nd. So now we're actually going to move downstairs into the multi-purpose room for our in-person audience. We have 12 booth hosts, all from different backgrounds. They're either University of Waterloo administration, or they're students, researchers, and a couple of companies. There is a robot demo. I know that always is a big draw for people. So as you travel out there, it is out the door to your right, and you see a kind of overhang onto the first floor. It is on the first floor, and you'll see a big yellow CBB banner right outside the door. So I invite you all to make your way down there. And for our online audience, we pre-recorded versions of the booth presentations, so those will start shortly for you. And the closing will also happen downstairs for the in-person audience. So hope to see you all in the multipurpose room downstairs.
All right, welcome to our virtual booth on Research Data Management Institutional Strategy. So Research Data Management, or RDM, refers to the processes applied throughout the life cycle of your research project to guide the collection, documentation, storage, sharing, and preservation of your research data. So back in 2021, the tri-agencies, so NSERC, CIHR, and SSHRC, released their policy on RDM. And the agencies believe that research data collected through the use of public funds should be responsibly and securely managed, and B, where ethical, legal, and commercial obligations allow, available for reuse by others. And so the tri-agencies support the FAIR principles guiding research data management and stewardship, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is not an open data policy, but the tri-agencies by default would prefer open data when possible. The agencies right now are piloting the use of data management plans in 5 of their grants. So you may see this on your research grant applications, but you might also see it from some journals which are requiring data deposit also. And if you need any help creating a research data management plan, please reach out to our librarians, and they can help you get to the tools that you need to work on this. The agencies also asked all institutions who receive research funds to create an institutional strategy. And so for the past year and a half, a working group that includes the library, IST, Office of Research, a faculty member, and a research support staff member from one of our faculties have been working on the institutional strategy. We worked with many focus groups on campus, with a researcher advisory board, did a survey to get engagement from our researchers, and ran 50 interviews in the hope of getting as much information as we could to create an institutional strategy that's going to really support our researchers. We also had a data management town hall back in November, and you can now read the final version of the strategy on our website, along with some links to FAQs and resources that can help you in your research. So the goal of our strategy is to amplify research excellence through research data management. We want a strategy that sets our researchers up for success and saves them some headaches down the road by doing some planning up front in your research project. Our strategy has 6 strategic directions that we will continue to work on. Those include coordination of services, incentivizing RDM, expanding our researchers' knowledge of RDM, promoting the benefits of RDM and awareness of the tools and resources that already exist, and investing in the expertise of our staff and on our technical infrastructure to support research data management. Our next step is to build some project plans that go with the goals that are in our strategy, put some actions to them, put some timelines on them, and so we anticipate many more conversations across campus to come. However, there are already many great RDM supports and resources available to you, so please check out our website so that you can find some links to them. As we continue to work on the implementation of our strategy, we would love to hear from you, so you can always reach out to the working group with your questions and comments, and it'll just help out our implementation move forward and be the one that's the best to help support our researchers. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Green and I'm here to talk to you today about Mitacs, which is a local funding organization that works to collaborate between student researchers and academic partners. So just to tell you a little bit about us, we are a not-for-profit and our main goal is to really foster growth and innovation in Canada, help grow new research projects, help grow new collaborations, and build new Canadian innovation projects. So Mitacs has been around for a while. We've been in operation for 23 years. We have more than 100 people like myself across Canada who work with various different partners, from academic institutions to incubators to some of our large corporate partners. And what we really do is we work with you and the academic partners to create a project and really help with recruiting that talent to contribute to the project. So we will work with you in the community to figure out, what your project needs are, what kind of things you're hoping to do, help to scope out that collaboration, and then introduce you to some academic expertise. So connecting to professors on campus, helping to hire research students, and working with those partners to build a project that you can do to help grow your business or help with a not-for-profit problem. And then we also contribute funding towards those projects to move it forward. So we work basically across the innovation roadmap. We don't have a specific stage that we work with. So anything from very early stage basic R&D all the way through commercialization of a product or a pilot study on something that maybe a policy piece. We can work in any different discipline as long as there is a strong research component. So we do that through a number of different programs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about all of the different programs that are available. This just gives you an overview of what's available for the different programs that are out there. We work with students on a number of projects if they're doing their own startups. We work with international collaborators, business projects. But the one I want to focus on today is Accelerate, which is our main program, our sort of bread and butter program that we use to bring out new collaborations. So in broad strokes, what does Mitacs do? So we work really hard to connect external partners across different sectors to different disciplines within the university. So finding ways to take the cool expertise that's in place on campus and connect it back to external partners that have problems to solve in the real world. And we do that by helping to subsidize research interns. So research interns can be undergraduate students all the way through postdocs. And what we do is really help them facilitate a project that works with both a professor on campus and an external partner organization that has a problem to be solved. So we do that through Accelerate, asking about research projects. So what we do is, again, it's hiring interns to work on those research projects that you're doing in collaboration with the expertise on campus from a professor. Accelerate is non-competitive, so it's really meant to be a program that sponsors as much research as we can, as long as you're fitting within some of the parameters of a project. We do have a very high success rate, and it's open year-round. So the idea is that there's funding available for any start date that makes sense for you, and if it's a good research project, we'll do our best to get it funded. We work with a number of different types of organizations. So you may have heard me say companies a few times. We work with a lot of business partners, but I wanted to let you know that we can also work with nonprofits. So we can do work with a number of nonprofit organizations, sometimes charity groups, different associations, as well as with municipal government. So government partners at the municipal level, like the City of Kitchener or the City of Waterloo, and hospitals. So if a hospital partner, say Grand River or St. Mary's or another partner, is interested in a project, we can also work there. And again, we can hire interns across the board. So we can work with undergrads all the way through postdoc and sometimes with recent graduate fellows as well. So really what we do is we provide funding to build out these projects. The minimum starting point for a project is 4 months of time. So this kind of one module, one term project. And we use that to build up bigger, longer term projects as necessary. So you can have, say, 1 intern for a summer, 5 interns for a term, 1 person over a few years, kind of whatever combination of those 4-month modules that makes the most sense. And the idea is that we can also submit these projects with to-be-determined interns. So if you have a professor that you're partnering with, but you still need to recruit students to work on the project, you can get that submitted, get the application process started, and work on that piece before you get to the point where you need to have the students named on the project. So we typically work at a 50-50 funding model. So 50% of the funding will come from your organization, supplemented by a 50% Mitacs grant. And that one-to-one grant basically works at usually 10 to 15K per module. So say at the lower end, the 10K, you're looking at a 5K match for your company, kind of per student, per term, building out the projects from there. So we'd like to just take a chance to say, you know, we're here to help you with your priorities. So if you are a hospital partner or a startup partner, you know, really think about how having students and having that expertise from campus could help you with your project. If it's an AI project, if it's an HR project, if you're looking at infrastructure, different pieces across the board, we're really here to help you make those projects a reality. You know, Mitacs is here to stretch your budget a little bit farther, help connect you with that talent, and then support those projects as they move forward. So we have our funding partners across Canada to thank for the pieces that we have for funding. And if you're interested in learning more, you can talk to me. I have my email here, as well as some information about our website. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alfred Yu, the Program Director of the Engineers Training Program here at the University of Waterloo. Engineers, or Next Generation Innovations in Ultrasonics, is a collaborative research training experience program that Waterloo has started in 2019. We're expected to finish in 2027. Engineers is an interdisciplinary training platform for HQPs. Here, trainees will be seeking to advance the engineering science of ultrasonics and to pioneer the development of next-generation ultrasound applications in both imaging and therapeutics. Within engineers, trainees will be engaged in research training in one of the 6 themes related to ultrasound, including 1, imaging innovations, 2, diagnostic application development, 3, AI-centric ultrasound imaging, 4, drug delivery and diagnostics of theranostics, 5, simulation and modeling, and 6, cellular biophysics of ultrasound. Within engineers, in addition to the research that trainees will be engaged in, they will also be involved in various professional skills development activities. That includes internship and exchange, where we actually would be setting up internships or clinical internships at hospitals, and also partnering labs. We also have the Entrust Academy, or the Entrepreneurship in Ultrasound Technology Academy. We also have summer schools, which is a series of guest lectures and special topic short courses for latest advances in ultrasonics. There's cadet workshops, career development and training workshops that focus on the development of various professional skills. We also have boot camp, which is an orientation camp where trainees will be engaged in research vision planning early on in collaboration and mentorship with senior trainees. We also have various graduate courses that would be focusing on the fundamentals and applications of ultrasonics to provide a rich core knowledge background to trainees. Trainee mobility is a key component of the Engineers Create program. We have been working with various partners around the world in Europe, Asia, and in the States, and also in Canada. Various industry partners and clinical partners have been hosting our trainees. Every year, we are expecting to host between 10 to 20 master's and PhD students and postdoctoral fellows within the Engineers platform. We are hoping to establish various training opportunities for them in order to develop a new generation of career-ready ultrasound experts who will be specializing in various aspects of ultrasound research. In the long run, we're hoping to develop these ultrasound experts to grow beyond just being a creator and user of ultrasound technologies. We're hoping that through the CREATE program, we will be developing trainees who will be perceptive, knowledgeable, versatile, collaborative, and communicative. And in doing so, we're hoping to contribute significantly to Canada's ultrasound industry and R&D community. Thank you.
Hello, I hope you are enjoying the conference. Thank you for visiting our virtual booth. I will be giving you a quick overview of the Center for Bioengineering and Biotechnology's training program, which is called Training in Global Biomedical Technology Research and Innovation. This training initiative is part of NSERC's Collaborative Research and Training Experience, or CREATE program. My name is Kenrick Vassall. I am the project coordinator at the Center for Bioengineering and Biotechnology, or CBB, and I serve as a program coordinator for CREATE Training in Global Biomedical Technology Research and Innovation. Training in Global Biomedical Technology Research and Innovation was launched in September 2018. It is the first needs-first graduate program in Canada in which trainees learn to directly interact with end users and stakeholders in the patient, medical, and biotechnology industry communities to co-discover technology problems and solutions. It has long been recognized that biomedical devices designed from a technology-first perspective can lead to ineffective designs that often fail to address the end user's real needs. In our CREATE program, we aim to train students who can deliver innovative new biomedical devices, materials, and technologies from a needs-first perspective. Training in Global Biomedical Technology Research and Innovation is a 7-year-long program that is funded by an NSERC grant and University of Waterloo institutional funds. Overall, the training program will receive $2.37 million in total funding over its lifetime. To date, we have trained 16 undergraduate and 60 graduate students. Our goal is to train over 100 students by the time the program ends in August 2025. Training in Global Biomedical Technology Research and Innovation is a multifaceted program in which trainees participate in training sessions and are also involved in research projects built on a needs-first philosophy. The program also supports mobility opportunities consisting of internships and academic exchanges. Our training sessions consist of lectures and workshops across 3 core training modules covering various topics in biomedical technology design, biomedical commercialization, and professional soft skills, as shown here. We have had more than 140 exclusive training activities since September 2018. Our content is delivered both synchronously and asynchronously by a multidisciplinary and multisectoral group of lecturers. The program also features an annual summer school and biomedical technology design challenge. All of our trainees are involved in cutting-edge biomedical research projects and are supervised by our world-class faculty. We have 3 primary research themes: medical instrumentation, prosthetics and rehabilitation, and in vitro ex vivo devices. We support CREATE research by providing undergraduate and graduate research stipends and conference travel awards. Our CREATE research projects have yielded 62 peer-reviewed publications, 67 conference presentations, and 3 patents. Our CREATE program works with its external partners to provide experiential learning opportunities for our trainees through internships and academic exchanges. Financial support is also available for many of these opportunities. To date, our trainees have participated in 6 industry internships, 2 academic exchanges, and 3 clinical internships. Our CREATE team consists of several University of Waterloo professors from different departments across our campus. Our program leader is Professor Catherine Burns, who is a professor in Systems Design Engineering, the Canada Research Chair in Human Factors and Healthcare Systems, and the Associate Vice President for Health Initiatives at the University of Waterloo. Our training program also has a number of collaborators who facilitate training sessions or mobility opportunities for our trainees, and we are very grateful for their support. Thanks again for visiting our booth. Please reach out if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Hi, I'm Justin Schorn, co-founder of Chirp. We're a velocity-based health startup right here in Kitchener-Waterloo, and we're helping seniors age in place. So Chirp started with an email like this from a friend who was a caregiver who had a lot of difficulty remotely monitoring mom's health. He didn't know if she was okay, he had to constantly check on her, and he was constantly in crisis mode. And if we look at the broader picture, the current system for helping seniors age in place is quite difficult. There's of course 90% of the seniors that do wish to age at home as long as possible. There's a huge labor shortage, whether it's with clinicians, PSWs, home care workers, and that's forcing a lot of families to even make trade-offs between going to work and caring for a loved one. And a big issue at home is obviously fall-related injuries for the elderly, which in the US is about 5 billion annually, and in Canada almost 6. So what's happening today? Many try to use wearable pennants, but they're difficult and inconvenient to use on a daily basis. And while video is passive, it's an unwelcome invasion of privacy. So CHIRP understands the needs of the three main stakeholders. The older adults want to stay at home, they want convenience, they want to be managed without compromising their privacy and dignity. Caregivers are looking for better ways of remotely supporting, mom or dad, and healthcare providers want to better understand real-time risk status and intervene as needed. So what CHIRP's doing is using radar sensing to baseline the behavior in the home. So it's almost like a wearable sensor, but it's ambient. We can track individuals in the home as they're moving around, standing up, toileting, getting down, and baselining and looking for anomalies that could indicate they're symptomatic for a particular health risk. In this case, we're showing an adult walking speed, which could again be a leading indicator on how well they're doing. So the CHIRP sensor is using a microphone for help detection, speaker for two-way voice communication, and the radar that's tracking activity, such as time spent in the bed, out of bed, washroom visits, walking speed, other things such as visitor monitoring as well. So this allows caregivers and clinicians to intervene in real time without, again, compromising the privacy of the senior, which is typically the case with camera-based solutions. So we can see real-time occupancy, how many bathroom visits, time spent in bed, and then real-time notifications if they're significantly different from their baseline. When we were building the CHIRP product, we looked at the different sensors that are available in the market today. And we were trying to balance the trade-off between high information volume so we can make really good decisions on what's happening in the home in real time, but also balancing privacy. And that's why we landed with radar, because there is relatively high information volume. We get gait, arm movement, posture, visitors, but it doesn't come at the expense of, let's say, having a video camera where the senior feels like someone can just hop into their bedroom and take a look at what they're doing. On the bottom end of the spectrum, this is what's typically in the market today. These are kind of relatively simple on-off sensors, such as pressure pad, a button, and maybe a PIR sensor. So what this ends up looking like from a market landscape perspective is we have the wearables using obviously accelerometers. We've got the legacy sensors that are PIR-based sensors, camera-based that are really good at capturing a lot of information but not so good at managing privacy, and then the core tech that are using kind of RF and other things. So what we're focused on is mainly in the home, where we do need that high information volume, but not at the expense of privacy. We see the market may be diverging, where camera-based systems might get more interest in facilities where the expectation of privacy is a little bit lower. So with all this data that we're able to collect, we're getting a smarter product over time, which is leading to more users, providing us more data, and the product continues to get smarter over time. So we have data on behavior. We've collected up to 3 years of data now across 100 different locations, and we're excited to kind of keep going. And here's an example of kind of what we're doing. Typical frailty assessment would involve going in to see a clinician, maybe getting a timed up and go test where you walk a certain speed, it's timed, you stand up, you sit down, that sort of thing. Can CHIRP use radar to passively monitor that in the home and see how well we're doing at maybe pre-screening people for fall risk? And here's an example of that radar tracking we have, where it's tracking somebody's mobility, looking at their walking speed, looking at how long it takes someone to sit down, and how long it takes for someone to, let's say, stand up, which could be a proxy for, let's say, muscle strength. And on the top left, that is a thermopile sensor that helps also annotate some of the data. Here's a quick little email we received from a family caregiver that was very appreciative that without CHIRP, they wouldn't have known that their father was in distress, and they were able to get more timely care. So that's about CHIRP. We're building a wall-mountable passive monitor that helps people age in place. Thank you.
Able Innovation's Alta platform really came to life to solve a clinical problem for hospitals in 3 areas. So patient safety and better patient transfers, staff safety, ensuring that staff are able to be working and having the tools required to safely transfer patients, and finally, staff efficiency. So how staff can use this platform to do transfers by themselves rather than the classical two staff or more to transfer a patient. The Able Innovations team first conceptualized the idea for a robotic patient bed. They then partnered with a researcher at Bruyère to further develop that idea into a prototype.
We've been working with Bruyère for 2.5 years now. We started with a small juvenile prototype with really just a concept of what we think a product might look like. And very early on, even with our concept, we got very direct and very straightforward feedback on what our product might look like once it got to full scale.
The real-world problem that the Alta is trying to address is that currently it takes at least 2 staff to be in the room to transfer the patient, and the Alta can allow for a single caregiver transfer. In addition, patients experience stress on their body from the slings that are used, and the Alta can reduce that as well.
I believe that using the Alta is going to be very helpful to our unit. One person only can do by themselves transferring the patient, and then also it will help to prevent more injury of the patient.
In addition, even in the last 4 months, I'd say, as we brought our product to the market and over to Bruyère's hospital, you guys have been tremendously supportive in the sense of even just providing something as simple as space. Having a space to work in that we can get access to, something as simple as providing us with different types of beds. It seems like a small thing, but for us, it makes our iteration process and our testing and our validation happen that much faster.
The ceiling lift, if you're a male, can be a lot more tightening. On the Ultra Lift, when everything runs smoothly with the Ultra Lift, it's very easy to get onto it, and you don't feel any strain. The only place I had the first time I had volunteered for it was in my knees and ankles. So they readjusted it, and the second time they came back, all of a sudden it was all gone.
But there's really nothing like hitting the front line and actually interacting with patients and nurses. And that's been tremendous for us. We've been able to implement additional modalities in our transfer functions. We've been able to improve our workflows and our human-machine interfaces. And it's helped us iterate that much faster than we could if we were trying to set up simulations and things like that back home.
As I said, the only way to make things better is by trial and error sometimes. There has to be somebody willing to do what I just finished doing to get something that is more beneficial for everybody. Just because I'm a little more broken than I used to be, I'm still willing to put up with whatever has to go with it, so it can get to that stage so that it will not be a problem for people in the future.
So the staff here has been tremendous. As I said, the access, being able to have dedicated facilities that we know if we need to test something or if we need to come on site and get access to staff and get feedback from patients. Like I said, we can't really put a price on that. It's been invaluable to us and our journey so far.
I'm a programmable humanoid robot.
What is life? Not just humans, but also any living creatures. How do they perceive the world? How can you create something like that in a computer or in a robot? Waterloo is a top university here in Canada, and they are committed to robotics, to artificial intelligence. I wanted to bring in my particular take on robotics, working in human-robot interaction and social robotics. Children are very interested in robots, and you can use this interest and this motivation to interact with them to identify certain educational or therapeutic goals and objectives. I think what we're doing here in the Social and Intelligent Robotics Laboratory is really special, that we try to design and create intelligent, autonomous robots, but robots that can work hand in hand with other people in a socially intelligent way. This new generation of machines that are very cleverly designed elicit certain reactions that are surprising. Would you trust a robot doing that? What does it mean? How would the robot have to relay to you its trustworthiness? But at the end of the day, robots need to go out into schools, into people's homes, into care homes, into hospitals. That's where they can make a difference, and you can use robotics in a positive sense.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Cristina Herrera. I'm a PhD candidate in kinesiology with a specialization in clinical biomechanics. My thesis focus is on breast cancer and oncological treatment happening on the shoulder and the upper extremity, especially radiation. And the study that I'm going to present today is a study that I did abroad in Germany, in Charité Hospital in Berlin, with a group of scientists over there. And it's entitled The Use of Quantitative Ultrasound Imaging of Bone for More Accessible Rib Quality Assessment in Breast Cancer Patients. Okay, just a quick overview. Breast cancer patients receiving oncological treatment, including radiation and bisphosphonate treatment, are exposed to rib fragility fractures. Unfortunately, the scope of these fractures in these populations is unclear due to the selective criteria that they use to prescribe the bone quality assessment on these patients. So most of the assessment are prescribed only in those patients that already had osteoporosis. And also we have limitations in the diagnostic equipment that they use to do the bone quality assessment, such as CT scan, computer tomography, and DEXA scan. And these limitations are associated with high cost, radiation exposure, limited value, 2D evaluation methods, and lack of portability. So we need a safer and more accessible approach. And the quantitative ultrasound is a promising tool to assess these limitations from DEXA and CT scan. And by enabling more accessible and consistent evaluations in this population, we can help them to reach a better quality of life, to avoid long-term pain, to avoid disabilities. So it's very important, this job in this area. So far, we know that the quantitative ultrasound has been used in other bone sites, such as the lumbar spine and the hips, which has a cortical bone mainly, but it hasn't been tested in the ribs, which is formed by trabecular bone mainly. So what have we done so far? So far we have performed a simulation model in Germany. So basically we use micro-CT data, and we created 2 rib models. One, it was focused on 5 years of radiation damage, and the other, it was 5 years of bisphosphonate treatment with gradients, densities, and stiffness. So we used a SeamsMD simulation tool, which basically was simulating an ultrasonic device. So we tested different target parameters from the bone metrics, and the most important target parameter that we tested is the bone volume fraction, or BV over TV. This plays a very significant role in determining bone strength, stiffness, and also resistance to fractures. So to describe this bone structure, we run a multivariate regression analysis with 16 backscatter ultrasonic parameters, and we compared these with the bone volume fraction, the BV over TV. What do the preliminary results show? We run a Gaussian process regression model, and we tested, and it was showed that it showed a good correspondence with the bone volume fraction, and it predicted nonlinear behaviors even with small data sets. We also validated this model with a cross-validation, and it shows R2 values of 0.69 and root mean square of 6.3. So it's very significant, and it shows a good correlation with the bone volume fraction. So what does it mean? This means that with this model, we find a very good significant relationship between the simulated and the target parameters. So we want to know if the ultrasonic parameters tested in experimental data can also predict the bone volume fraction, or the BV over TB. We already collected this data in volunteers. So we collected the data from the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th ribs. That are the ribs that are more exposed to the fractures due to radiation and bisphosphonates. And we are now in processing stages. And after that is completed, we're aiming to perform the same experiments on breast cancer patients. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Charity Oga-Omenka, an assistant professor with the School of Public Health Sciences here at the University of Waterloo. My project is developing a website for TB care to link the public and the private sector providers in Nigeria. Before the pandemic, tuberculosis is the highest infection, claiming lives globally. Every year, an estimated 10.6 million people, sometimes 10 million people get infected. And out of this, only about half get diagnosed globally. And almost 2 million people die from the disease every year. Nigeria is among 5 countries that contribute 75% of this gap of people that are not diagnosed. And one of the reasons for Nigeria particularly is that the TB services are located in the public sector, yet 65 to 75% of people go to the private sector first when they get ill. So we're hoping with this project to explore how web-based technologies from university, with help from the University of Waterloo professors, can help to integrate traditional systems of TB care, like paper-based registers and all that, with a web-based technology can help to reduce this gap and contribute to improving tuberculosis control. Now, our research questions are: what are the current technology-based services available in Nigeria, and how well are they doing? And what are the different organizations that are offering these services? What are the human, material, and financial resources that are available for technology-based TB care? And what is the performance of these tools, and how effective are they? What are the gaps? What are the unmet needs for technology-based services in Nigeria? And how can TB care technology be redesigned and integrated with traditional and existing healthcare system to improve efficiency and reduce costs? So our methodology is first starting with a literature review, looking at published and gray literature, and review of TB technologies in high-burden countries all over the world. And by high-burden countries, I mean high-burden TB countries all over the world. And then we'll do a needs assessment using the PRECEDE model to sort of assess TB technology in Nigeria, and then and also to assess, what needs there are. And then we'll look at existing forms, be it paper-based registers or some software or some, Microsoft Word Office tools that are being used, and just look at all of these systems and see how we can bring it together into one system. And then we'll also do in-depth interviews with managers, with providers, with policymakers on the current challenges of tech-based technologies in Nigeria, and also to get from them what recommendations they would give for improving these systems. Then finally, we want to develop like a technology plan. And this plan, spreading over some years, but we want to develop a plan, that has, the planning phase, the analysis phase, the design phase, the implementation phase, and the maintenance. What are the overarching goals? We want to first have a technology needs assessment for Nigeria, and also promote cross-country learning. Countries like India have effectively used technology to improve surveillance in tuberculosis and improve the number of notifications for tuberculosis, and therefore reducing the number of people that are missing, the number of people with TB that are missing. So we want to, improve or stimulate cross-country learning between these countries that have used these technologies and Nigeria. Then we also want to develop like a system, including a website, including text messaging that providers and patients can use, and then also applications that will be used for TB in Nigeria. And then overall, we want to improve healthcare access. And the expected outcomes, this project with the funding from the Graham Seed funding and with funding from CBB, we want to start the first step of getting together this plan, and then have like a harmonized web tool in Nigeria that improves surveillance, prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and national information systems, and of course, contact tracing and patient care. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is George Shaker. I'm the director of the Wireless Sensors and Devices Lab at University of Waterloo. At the lab, we do lots of work related to electromagnetic systems. We investigate wireless power transfer, radar remote sensing, actuation, and we do significant research on the area of data transfer, whether on 5G or beyond. The lab is part of many other bigger labs at the university. We do lots of work with the Center of Intelligent Antenna and Radio Systems, where we can actually investigate lots of electromagnetic compatibility issues related to autonomous vehicles, for example. We also are part of the RoboHub, where we investigate integrating sensors into the next generation of robotics. And a big chunk of the work we do is positioned at the Research Institute for Aging, where we have a research apartment, and there we actually develop different technologies related to health and aging. As an example of some of the work that we have been doing over the last few months, we actually had radars installed in the different hospitals. We have been monitoring patients 24/7. We have been part of the first of its kind research study on health impacts on an activity with the Canadian Space Agency. So over these studies, we have fine-tuned our systems where we can now monitor patients without any wires, without having them to put any wearables, just very, very easily, in a zero effort, we just can extract their breathing rate, their heart rate, and other vitals, all wirelessly and all remotely. Also, we have installed our system in long-term care homes, and there we actually have been monitoring older adults, again, 24/7, no wires attached, no wearables, and we have been collecting lots of significant data that we hope will help them or will help shape the LTC future in Canada. It's not only about healthcare. It's the radar technology, the same principles can be applied in other applications. So our work on radars in cars have been shown to be a life-saving technology, where we actually can detect if a child or an infant been left behind in a car, and this way, hopefully, we can save many lives down the road. So please visit our Google Scholar page for a list of our publications. You can also visit our website, www.uwaterloo.ca/WSDL, and there you'll find lots of video demos and copies of the publications that we have had over the last few years. Thank you.
Okay, we've reached the end of the conference. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, in particular our speakers, panelists, and student presenters. In addition, I'd like to thank the CVB admin team for all their work in putting together a successful conference. Considering societal changes in Canada and around the world, technology is going to be increasingly a part of healthcare delivery and the healthcare system. So we need to consider these and their ramifications on economic, logistics, and the human elements of healthcare delivery. I would like to make a special note that in lieu of speaker honorariums, the Center for Bioengineering and Biotechnology has made small donations to Grand River Hospital, our community partner, in the form of vital sign monitors and IV pumps, as well as books. We hope that this action will have a small impact on the burden of healthcare delivery. And while events like this will continue the conversation and enhance it around the future of health delivery and its intersection with technology for the benefit of all citizens. Thank you again for attending.